Please, just pretend you're hugging me so I can escape," the desperate little girl whispered to a stranger, completely unaware that this man was a billionaire who would change her life forever. Começar como capítulo 1. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The autumn rain hammered the sidewalks of downtown Chicago, turning the world into a blur of grey concrete and streaming headlights. David Mitchell pulled his black wool coat tighter as he stepped out of the Pierce & Associates building, his lawyer's words still echoing in his mind. "The insurance settlement is complete, David. Sarah's affairs are all in order now. 6 months. 6 months since the accident that took everything from him." He walked aimlessly through the financial district, his Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles he didn't bother to avoid. The 30-year-old tech mogul who had once commanded boardrooms with confidence now felt like a ghost wandering through his own life. His company, Mitchell Technologies, practically ran itself these days. He'd built it too well, made himself almost unnecessary, just like everything else in his world now. The sound of running footsteps broke through his haze of self-pity, small, frantic steps getting closer. David looked up just as a tiny figure collided with his legs, nearly knocking him backward. "Please," a breathless voice whispered urgently. "Please, mister, just pretend you're hugging me." David looked down, stunned. A small girl, maybe 7 years old, with tangled dark hair and clothes that had seen better days, was pressed against him. Her brown eyes were wide with desperation, darting frantically over his shoulder. "There she is!" a gruff voice shouted from behind them. "Emma, you get back here right now!" The girl, Emma, looked up at David with pleading eyes. "Please," she whispered again. "Just for a minute. Pretend I'm your daughter." Something in her voice, something in those eyes that held far too much fear for a child, made David's decision for him. Without thinking, he wrapped his arms around the trembling girl, pulling her close. "Emma, sweetheart," he said loudly, his voice carrying the authority he'd learned from years of business negotiations. "There you are. Daddy was looking everywhere for you." 2 men in dark uniforms approached, their faces flushed and angry. David recognized them immediately. Private security from Riverside Children's Home, the overcrowded state facility on the south side. "Sir," the taller guard panted, "that's one of our residents. She ran away during outdoor time." David felt Emma's small hands grip his coat tighter. "I'm sorry," he said calmly, "but I think you're mistaken. This is my daughter, Emma Mitchell." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. David's expensive suit, his confident bearing, the way he naturally commanded the space around him. It all suggested a man accustomed to being believed without question. "Sir, we have records," the shorter guard began. "Are you questioning my identification of my own child?" David's voice carried just enough steel to make both men step back. "Because if you are, I think my lawyers would be very interested to hear about it." The taller guard cleared his throat nervously. "Of course not, sir. We must have been mistaken. The girl we're looking for has darker hair." As the guards retreated, mumbling apologies, David felt Emma's grip slowly relax. But she didn't let go, and something deep in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for months, began to crack. "Thank you," she whispered into his coat. David looked down at this brave little girl who had somehow stumbled into his life at the exact moment when he'd been wondering if he had any reason left to keep living. "You're welcome, Emma. But I think we need to talk." As the rain continued to fall around them, neither of them realized that this desperate embrace would be the beginning of something that would save them both. But first, they had to survive what was coming next. Because running away from Riverside Children's Home was just the beginning of Emma's problems. And David Mitchell was about to discover that some rescue missions change the rescuer more than the rescued. David guided Emma through the opulent lobby of the Four Seasons, acutely aware of the curious glances from other guests. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the pristine marble floor, and she kept her head down, shoulders hunched, as if expecting someone to grab her at any moment. The contrast between her tattered clothing and the hotel's luxury felt almost obscene. "Mr. Mitchell?" The concierge nodded respectfully, his trained eyes barely flickering over Emma's appearance. "Your usual suite?" "Yes, thank you, Marcus." David's voice remained steady, but his mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. What was he doing? He'd just committed what was essentially kidnapping, helping a child evade lawful custody. But something about Emma's raw terror had awakened protective instincts he didn't know he still possessed after months of emotional numbness. In the elevator, Emma finally broke the silence. "Why did you help me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter this unexpected sanctuary. David studied her reflection in the polished brass doors. Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the obvious neglect, her chin held a stubborn tilt that reminded him painfully of Sarah. His late wife had possessed that same fierce determination, that refusal to back down even when the odds were impossible. "Why did you run away?" "They were going to separate me from Tommy," she whispered, her small hands clenching into fists. "He's only 5. He can't survive there without me. He has nightmares every night, and he won't eat if I'm not there to make sure he's safe." The elevator opened to the penthouse floor with a soft chime. David's suite was a testament to his phenomenal success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan's grey waters, Italian leather furniture that cost more than most people's cars, a gourmet kitchen he never used, artwork worth millions adorning the walls. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by opulence she'd never imagined. "Who's Tommy?" David asked gently, leading her to the plush couch that could seat 8 people comfortably. "My little brother. We've been together at Riverside for 2 years, since." She trailed off, her small hands twisting anxiously in her lap. "They said a family wants to adopt him, but not me. I'm too old, they said. 7 is too old." "Nobody wants 7-year-olds who ask too many questions." David's chest tightened with an emotion he'd thought died with Sarah, righteous anger on behalf of someone else's pain. "And you've been taking care of him all this time." "Someone has to. He has nightmares about the fire, about Mommy and Daddy not being there anymore. He doesn't eat if I'm not there to remind him. He gets scared when the older kids are mean." Emma's voice cracked, revealing the enormous weight this 7-year-old had been carrying. "I can't let them take him away from me. He's all I have left in the whole world." For the first time in months, David felt genuine purpose stirring in his chest, pushing through the fog of grief that had consumed him. "Emma, what if I told you there might be another way? What if we could find a solution that keeps you and Tommy together permanently?" Emma's eyes widened with hope, so pure and desperate it nearly broke his heart. "You would do that? For us? But you don't even know us." "I'm going to try with everything I have," David said, and for the first time since Sarah's funeral, he meant something completely. "But first you need food and rest. Tomorrow we figure out how to save your brother and make sure you never have to be separated again." As Emma finally allowed herself to relax into the plush cushions, David realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he had something worth fighting for again. 2 somethings, actually. And he was going to move heaven and earth to protect them both. The next morning, David sat across from his longtime lawyer, Robert Chen, in the man's mahogany-paneled office overlooking downtown Chicago. Robert's expression grew increasingly concerned as David explained the previous day's events, his manicured fingers drumming nervously on the leather desk pad. "Let me understand this correctly," Robert said slowly, removing his wire-rimmed glasses to clean them, a nervous habit David recognized from 20 years of legal battles. You want to adopt 2 children you met yesterday, one of whom is technically a fugitive from state custody, and you're asking me to make this happen immediately. Emma isn't a fugitive, Robert. She's a terrified little girl trying to protect her brother from a system that's failed them both catastrophically. Robert leaned back in his leather chair, studying his most successful client with worried eyes. David, I understand you're still processing your grief over Sarah, but this isn't the way to fill that void. Taking on damaged children isn't therapy, and it's not what Sarah would have wanted for you. This has nothing to do with grief, David interrupted sharply, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. These kids need help, and I'm in a position to provide it. I have unlimited resources, a stable home, and the time to dedicate to their healing. The state won't see it that way. You're a single man with no parenting experience, and frankly, your mental state since the accident has been... Robert's voice softened with genuine concern. You've barely left your penthouse in 6 months. You've missed critical board meetings. Your assistant fields calls from concerned investors weekly. The press is starting to ask questions about Mitchell Technologies' leadership stability. David stood abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows. My mental state is perfectly fine. I'm functioning, I'm making decisions, I'm managing my responsibilities. You're surviving, not living. There's a difference. Robert's voice carried the weight of decades of friendship. I'm worried about you, but taking on severely traumatized children isn't the solution. The adoption process alone could take years, assuming the state even considers you eligible. David turned back to his friend and legal counsel. They're not damaged goods to be fixed, Robert. They're survivors who've been let down by every adult who was supposed to protect them. If I don't help them, who will? Back at the hotel suite, David found Emma curled up by the massive windows, still wearing yesterday's clothes, despite the shopping bags full of new outfits he'd had delivered. She looked impossibly small against the backdrop of Chicago's towering skyline, a tiny figure dwarfed by a world too big and cruel for someone her age. "How did it go with your lawyer?" she asked quietly, not turning from the window. David sat beside her on the window seat, noting how she instinctively tensed before forcing herself to relax. It's going to be complicated. The system. It's not designed for situations like this. There are procedures, waiting periods, evaluations. Emma nodded with the resigned wisdom of someone who'd learned early that adults made promises they couldn't keep. It's okay. I understand. You tried, and that's more than anyone else has done. Emma, look at me. He waited until her brown eyes met his, seeing the fragile hope she was trying so hard to protect. I said complicated, not impossible. I don't give up easily. Ask anyone who's tried to compete against Mitchell Technologies. I fight until I win. For the first time since he'd met her, Emma smiled, really smiled, lighting up her entire face. So what do we do now? Now we go see Tommy, officially as your potential new family. David pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts that represented decades of accumulated favors and influence. I'm calling in every marker I have. By tonight, I want to understand exactly what we're fighting and how to win. Emma threw her thin arms around him in a fierce hug, and David felt something he'd forgotten existed. Hope mixed with fierce determination and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that he finally had something worth fighting for again. Riverside Children's Home, squatted like a grey concrete fortress on Chicago's neglected South Side, its narrow windows barred and unwelcoming, chain-link fence topped with razor wire making it look more like a minimum security prison than a place meant to nurture children. David's gleaming black Tesla looked absurdly out of place in the pothole-riddled parking lot, drawing suspicious stares from the few staff members visible through the building's grimy windows. "I don't want to go back in there," Emma whispered, gripping David's hand tightly enough to leave marks. Her entire body trembled as they approached the institutional entrance. "It smells like disinfectant and sadness, and the walls are always cold." "You won't have to stay," David promised, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "We're just visiting Tommy, remember? Just long enough to let him know that someone's fighting for both of you." Director Margaret Walsh was a stern woman in her mid-50s who clearly viewed David with deep suspicion despite his expensive suit and obvious wealth. Her office was Spartanly functional, decorated only with motivational posters about discipline building character and a single wilting plant that seemed to mirror the hope of the children in her care. "Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate your sudden interest in adoption," Walsh said, her tone suggesting anything but appreciation. "But I must inform you that Emma Chen is not available for placement. She's exhibited serious behavioral issues that make her unsuitable for family integration." "What kind of behavioral issues?" David asked, his businessman's instincts immediately suspicious of such vague accusations. Running away, defiance of authority figures, inability to adjust to our established structure and rules. She's been consistently disruptive to other children's placement opportunities. Walsh's tone was clipped, professional, but David caught something else underneath, genuine dislike for a 7-year-old child. "She questions our decisions, undermines our staff, and has proven incapable of accepting appropriate discipline." David felt Emma tense beside him, shrinking into herself as if trying to become invisible. "She's 7 years old. Age doesn't excuse destructive behavior, Mr. Mitchell. However, her brother Tommy is an excellent candidate for adoption. Well-behaved, adaptable, no history of problems or defiance. Several families have expressed strong interest in him." They were led through sterile hallways, lined with motivational posters that felt cruelly ironic given the obvious despair of the place. "Every day is a new beginning," hung above a water stain spreading across cracked ceiling tiles. Children of various ages sat in a dreary common room, their faces blank with the particular emptiness David recognized from his own recent months of existing rather than living. Then Emma broke free from David's hand and ran toward a small boy with sandy hair and Emma's same expressive brown eyes. "Tommy, you did them." The reunion was heartbreaking in its desperate intensity. Tommy, who couldn't have been more than 5, launched himself into Emma's arms and clung to her as if she were his lifeline, which, David realized with growing anger, she probably was. The little boy sobbed against her shoulder, his thin frame shaking with relief and terror. "Emma, they said you were gone forever and never coming back." Tommy's voice was high with panic, the words tumbling over each other. "I didn't eat yesterday or the day before. I couldn't find you anywhere. Mrs. Patterson said you probably got hit by a car." "I'm here now, baby," Emma soothed, running her fingers through his hair with the practiced gentleness of someone who'd been mothering him for years. "I'm here, and I brought someone special to meet you." Director Walsh watched the reunion with obvious disapproval. "As you can see, their codependency is highly problematic. Tommy needs to learn independence and appropriate attachment boundaries." "He needs his sister," David said firmly, watching Tommy cling to Emma like she was the only solid thing in his world. "And I want to adopt them both, together, as a family unit. That's absolutely not possible. Emma is unsuitable for placement due to her behavioral issues and inability to integrate into structured family environments. Emma is a 7-year-old girl who's been forced to parent her traumatized little brother because your institution has failed to provide adequate care." David's voice carried the same implacable authority that had built his empire. "I'm prepared to provide both children with a loving home, excellent education, comprehensive therapy, and whatever resources they need to heal from their trauma." Walsh's face hardened into ugly lines. "Mr. Mitchell, I think this meeting is over. You clearly don't understand the complexities of institutional childcare." As they prepared to leave, Tommy wouldn't release his grip on Emma. His small fingers tangled in her shirt. "Don't leave me again," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I can't sleep without you. The nightmares come back." "I'll be back for you," Emma promised fiercely, her own tears falling freely. "I swear on Mommy and Daddy's graves I'll be back for you. Mr. David is going to help us be a real family." Watching that desperate goodbye, David made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't just going to adopt these children. He was going to systematically destroy the institution that had tortured them. 3 days later, David's private investigator, Janet Rodriguez, spread photographs and documents across his dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. Emma was safely occupied at the hotel's supervised kids club. David had convinced her she needed to act like a normal child for a few hours while he planned their next moves in what was rapidly becoming a war. "You're not going to like what I've found," Janet said grimly, her weathered face serious as she organized the damning evidence. "Riverside Children's Home has been under state investigation for the past 18 months. Chronic understaffing, inadequate supervision, allegations of emotional abuse, and financial irregularities that would make your accountant weep." David studied the photographs with growing horror. Overcrowded dormitories, with children sleeping on mattresses on the floor. Broken playground equipment held together with duct tape. Kids with hollow eyes, and the particular stillness that comes from having hope systematically crushed. Why hasn't this place been shut down? Politics and money, the usual suspects. Director Walsh has deep connections in the State Department. Her brother-in-law sits on the oversight committee. Plus, they're significantly cheaper than other facilities, so the state keeps funneling kids there to save budget money. Janet pointed to a particularly damning photo of children eating what looked like prison food. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 separate families have specifically requested Tommy Chen for adoption in the past 6 months. All of them were told Emma wasn't available due to severe behavioral issues. Behavioral issues like protecting her brother and asking inconvenient questions. Exactly. I interviewed former staff members who quit in disgust. They painted a very different picture of Emma. Responsible, nurturing, actually helped younger children adapt to the facility. She taught some kids to read, mediated conflicts, even organized secret birthday celebrations with smuggled treats. Janet's expression darkened with professional anger. But she also asked too many questions about why siblings were being deliberately separated, why some children received preferential treatment, why adoption processes kept failing. David felt his carefully controlled anger building into something volcanic. She was a threat to their profitable system of dysfunction. Gets much worse. Tommy's had 3 serious adoption attempts fall through in the past year. Each time, the prospective families said he was too severely traumatized, too pathologically attached to his sister. He'd cry for Emma constantly, refuse to eat, have panic attacks so severe they required medical intervention. Janet pulled out another stack of documents. The last family filed an official complaint, saying the home never disclosed the extent of his psychological damage. Damage that was directly caused by forcing him to live without his primary attachment figure. Because they deliberately separated him from the only person who could help him heal. There's more, and it's going to break your heart. I found Emma and Tommy's original case files, along with newspaper coverage of their parents' deaths. Janet's voice gentled with genuine compassion. House fire 2 years ago. Electrical malfunction in the middle of the night. Emma woke up to smoke, managed to get Tommy out of his crib and carry him to safety. She saved his life, David. She was 5 years old and she carried her 3-year-old brother through a burning house. David had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. This 7-year-old girl had already lost everything once. had literally carried her brother through fire to safety and had spent 2 years fighting to keep their family together in a system designed to tear them apart for profit. Janet, I need you to dig deeper into everything. Walsh's finances, board member connections, state funding patterns, failed adoptions. If they want to play hardball with these children's lives, they're going to discover what real power looks like when it's properly motivated. When Emma returned that evening, chattering excitedly about making friends at the kids' club, she found David on the phone with an army of allies: his corporate attorney, venture capitalist contacts, investigative journalists, and 3 different child advocacy organizations. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly, her newfound happiness dimming as she read the tension in his voice. David hung up and knelt to her level, taking her small hands in his. "Emma, how would you feel about never having to worry about being separated from Tommy again? About having a real home where you're both safe and loved?" Her eyes lit up with hope and terror in equal measure. "What do you mean? Are you really going to be our daddy?" "I mean, I'm going to make sure you and Tommy come home with me, where you belong, as my children. But I need you to trust me completely, because this fight is going to get very ugly before it gets better." Emma straightened her small shoulders with determination that reminded David of every successful battle he'd ever fought, every impossible deal he'd closed, through sheer refusal to accept defeat. "I trust you more than anyone in the world. And I'm not afraid of ugly anymore. I've been living in ugly for 2 whole years, and I'm ready to fight for something beautiful." As David tucked Emma into the guest bedroom that night, reading her a story about families who stayed together no matter what, he had no idea that Director Walsh was already planning her vicious counterattack. The phone call that would threaten to destroy everything was coming in less than 12 hours. The call came at 6:47 a.m., jolting David from the first genuinely peaceful sleep he'd had in months. Sleep that had come from finally having a purpose beyond mere survival. "Mr. Mitchell?" The voice was official, cold, carrying the authority of law enforcement. "This is Detective Sarah Martinez with Chicago Police Department. We need to speak with you immediately regarding Emma and Tommy Chen." David's blood turned to ice water. "Chen? The minor children you've been harboring illegally. We need you and the girl to report to the station immediately for questioning regarding kidnapping charges, interference with legal custody, and child endangerment." Would be an hour later, David sat in a sterile interrogation room that smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. Emma pressed close to his side, both of them facing Detective Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, and a sharp-faced woman introduced as Karen Phillips from Child Protective Services. "Mr. Mitchell," Detective Martinez began, consulting a thick file, "you're in extremely serious legal trouble. Interfering with lawful custody, harboring a runaway minor, potentially kidnapping charges that could result in decades in federal prison. I helped a frightened child who asked for protection. You helped a minor child evade lawful authorities and legal guardianship," Phillips interrupted smoothly. "Emma has been officially reported missing from state custody for 4 days. During this time, her brother Tommy has been placed with an approved foster family who can provide appropriate care." Emma gasped audibly, her small body going rigid with terror. "No, you can't take Tommy. I promised I'd come back for him. He can't survive without me." "Emma?" Philip's voice took on a patronizingly gentle tone that made David's skin crawl. "Sometimes promises can't be kept by children who don't understand adult responsibilities. Tommy is in a wonderful, stable home now with people who can provide proper structure and care without the burden of an unstable sibling relationship." "I provide proper care." Emma's voice cracked with desperate fury. "I've taken care of him since he was 3 years old. I saved him from the fire. He won't eat or sleep without me. He'll think I abandoned him." David felt rage building in his chest like molten metal. Where exactly is Tommy right now? Phillips exchanged a meaningful look with Detective Martinez. That information is confidential for the child's protection. But I can assure you he's receiving excellent professional care from a thoroughly vetted family with extensive experience in childhood trauma. What family? What are their qualifications? How long have they been approved? David pressed, his business instincts screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with their evasions. Mr. Mitchell, Detective Martinez leaned forward intimidatingly. Your primary concern should be avoiding serious criminal charges that could destroy your life and business empire. We're prepared to be lenient if you cooperate fully and return Emma to proper state custody immediately with no further interference. David looked down at Emma, who was trying so desperately to be brave. Her small fists clenched, white-knuckled in her lap, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Everything in him rebelled against handing this child back to people who saw her as a problem to be eliminated, rather than a little girl to be cherished and protected. I want to speak to my lawyer immediately. Mr. Mitchell, Phillips said with oily smoothness, dragging this out with expensive legal maneuvering will only traumatize Emma further and make her eventual reintegration into appropriate care much more difficult. Reintegration into what? A system that systematically failed her from the moment she entered it? Phillips's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing something ugly underneath. The system works effectively for children who work with it constructively. Emma has shown consistent inability to adapt to necessary structure and legitimate authority. Emma has shown consistent courage in protecting her brother in an environment that deliberately tried to destroy their family bond for financial convenience. Mr. Mitchell, Detective Martinez's tone turned sharp and threatening. You have exactly 10 minutes to decide. Cooperate fully right now, and we'll consider this an unfortunate misunderstanding. Continue to obstruct legal proceedings, and you'll be arrested for multiple felonies, including child endangerment. David felt the carefully constructed trap closing around them like a steel cage. But as Emma looked up at him with absolute trust blazing in her eyes, trust that said he was the only adult who'd ever truly fought for her, he realized something that changed the entire game. He wasn't fighting for custody anymore. He was fighting for justice, and he had resources they couldn't even imagine. Detective Martinez, David said with deadly calm. Before we continue, I want to officially report multiple crimes: systematic child abuse, deliberate infliction of psychological trauma, conspiracy to separate siblings for financial gain, and fraud in adoption proceedings. And I have comprehensive evidence. Phillips went visibly pale. Mr. Mitchell, you're making completely unfounded accusations that could constitute slander. Am I? David pulled out his phone with surgical precision. Because I think the FBI field office would be fascinated by Janet Rodriguez's investigation into Riverside Children's Home's financial irregularities, the documented pattern of deliberately sabotaged adoptions, and the systematic abuse of vulnerable children. Ade, as the adults stared at each other across the table in electric silence, Emma whispered something that stopped everyone cold. Tommy isn't with a nice family, is he? He's still at Riverside, in the punishment room where they put kids who cry too much. The silence that followed told David everything he needed to know. The real war was just beginning, and now he knew exactly what kind of monsters he was fighting. But Emma had just revealed she knew far more about the institution's dark secrets than any of them had realized. Secrets that could bring down the entire corrupt system. Within 2 hours of Emma's revelation about the punishment room, David had mobilized a team that would have impressed a Fortune 500 crisis management firm. His penthouse suite had been transformed into a war room, complete with laptops, legal documents, and a direct line to investigative journalist Rebecca Torres from the Chicago Tribune. Emma, David said gently, kneeling beside her as she sat curled in the window seat. "I need you to tell me everything you know about this punishment room. Can you do that for Tommy?" Emma's eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady with the terrible wisdom of a child who'd seen too much. "It's in the basement, past the laundry room where they make us work. Mrs. Walsh puts kids there when they act out. That means crying for their families or asking questions about why they can't call their relatives." She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "There's no windows, just a mattress on the floor and a bucket. They give you one meal a day and tell you to think about your behavior." David's hands clenched into fists. "How long do children stay there?" "Depends on how sorry you act. Billy Martinez was there for 5 days last month because he wouldn't stop asking about his grandmother. When he came out, he didn't talk for weeks." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "Tommy was there 3 times before I learned to stop them from taking him. That's why I have to ask so many questions and cause trouble. It keeps their attention on me instead of him." Rebecca Torres looked up from her laptop, her seasoned journalist's face pale with shock. "David, if this is true, we're talking about systematic child abuse on a scale that could bring down the entire state oversight system. This isn't just institutional negligence. This is torture." David's phone buzzed with a text from Janet Rodriguez. "Emergency. Found Tommy. Get down here now. Bringing backup." 20 minutes later, David's convoy of black SUVs pulled up to Riverside Children's Home, followed closely by Rebecca's news van and 3 Child Protective Services vehicles that Janet had somehow convinced to join their impromptu raid. Director Walsh met them at the entrance, her face twisted with fury and panic. "You have no authority here, Mitchell. This is harassment of a state institution." David stepped closer to Walsh, his voice deadly quiet. "Where is Tommy Chen? That child is receiving appropriate disciplinary guidance for his behavioral issues. Where is he?" David's roar echoed through the institutional hallways, causing several children to peer around doorways in terror and fascination. Janet appeared beside him, her face grim. "Basement level, 3rd room past the industrial washers. David, he's—" She shook her head. "Just prepare yourself." The punishment room was everything Emma had described and worse. Tommy sat in a corner, thin arms wrapped around his knees, rocking slightly. He looked like he'd aged years in the 4 days since David had seen him, his face gaunt with dehydration and terror. When he saw the adults entering, he pressed himself further into the corner. "Please don't hurt me anymore," he whispered. "I'll be good. I won't cry for Emma anymore, I promise." David had never experienced rage like what filled him in that moment. This wasn't anger. This was a fundamental shift in his understanding of what he was capable of protecting and destroying. He knelt slowly beside Tommy, his voice infinitely gentle, despite the fury burning in his chest. "Tommy, do you remember me? I'm David, Emma's friend. She sent me to bring you home to her." Tommy's eyes widened with desperate hope. "Emma, she's really okay. They said she was dead, that she got hit by a car because she ran away." "Emma is safe and waiting for you. She never stopped fighting to get back to you." David carefully extended his hand. "Would you like to see her right now?" As Tommy launched himself into David's arms, clinging to him with the desperate strength of a child who'd been drowning and finally found solid ground, David made a vow that would reshape his entire life. He wasn't just going to destroy Riverside Children's Home. He was going to make sure no child ever suffered like this again. Behind them, Rebecca Torres documented everything with the thoroughness of a Pulitzer Prize winner who just found the story of her career. Director Walsh's reign of terror was about to become front-page news across the entire nation. But first, David had 2 children to get home safely and a war to finish. The Chicago Tribune's expose hit newsstands and digital platforms at 6 a.m. sharp, with a headline that stopped traffic. "House of Horrors. Billionaire tech CEO exposes systematic child abuse at city-funded facility. Rebecca Torres had worked through the night, crafting a piece so devastating that it immediately went viral, shared thousands of times within hours. David sat in his penthouse living room, Emma curled against his left side, and Tommy pressed against his right, both children finally asleep after their emotional reunion the night before. His phone had been buzzing incessantly since dawn, with calls from reporters, politicians, and child advocacy groups across the country. "Mr. Mitchell," Rebecca's voice came through his Bluetooth earpiece. "CNN wants a live interview in 30 minutes. The governor's office is demanding an immediate investigation. And Director Walsh just called a press conference claiming you're mentally unstable and using these children as pawns in some kind of grief-induced breakdown." David gently extracted himself from the sleeping children, tucking blankets around them. "Let her try. Janet's evidence is bulletproof, and we have Tommy's medical records from last night's hospital evaluation. Dehydration, malnutrition, and trauma responses that would be criminal if they happened to an adult prisoner." The morning talk show appearances were a masterclass in controlled fury. David sat across from seasoned journalists, his manner calm and professional, but his words carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. When Walsh appeared on a competing network, claiming Emma was a disturbed child with a history of manipulation and lies, David's response was swift and devastating. "Director Walsh is a woman who put a 5-year-old boy in solitary confinement for crying for his sister," he said directly into the camera. "I'll let the public decide who's manipulating whom here." By noon, protesters had gathered outside Riverside Children's Home, carrying signs reading, "Save our children," and "Close this house of horrors." Social media exploded with Cheeks Justice for Emma and Tommy hashtags. Child welfare advocates from across the nation began calling for federal intervention. Dr. Patricia Williams, the child psychologist David had hired to evaluate both children, delivered her preliminary findings via video conference to his legal team. "The trauma these children have experienced is profound and systematic. Emma exhibits hypervigilance consistent with prolonged stress, and Tommy shows clear signs of institutional abuse syndrome. The fact that Emma has managed to maintain her protective instincts and emotional resilience is extraordinary." Emma stirred on the couch, blinking in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Is all this really happening because of us?" David sat beside her, smoothing her hair gently. "This is happening because brave little girls like you finally have someone with enough power to make the world listen. Are we in trouble? Are they going to take Tommy away again?" "Never," David said with absolute certainty. "I promise you, Emma, they will never separate you from Tommy again, not while I have breath in my body." Emma studied his face with the serious intensity of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions for survival. "Are you really going to be our daddy? Like forever and ever, even when we're grown up?" The question hit David with unexpected force. In all his strategic planning and legal maneuvering, he'd focused on rescuing these children from immediate danger. But Emma was asking about permanence, about belonging, about the kind of forever family that both children had lost in a house fire 2 years ago. "Yes," he said, and realized he'd never meant anything more completely in his life. "Forever and ever. Even when you're grown up with families of your own, you'll always be my children." Emma smiled with pure joy and threw her arms around his neck, but over her shoulder David could see Tommy watching them with eyes that held too much wariness for a 5-year-old. The little boy had learned not to trust promises of forever. David had his work cut out for him, but for the first time in months, that work felt like the most important thing he'd ever attempted. Outside, the media war raged on, but inside his penthouse, he was learning to be someone he'd never been before, a father. The phone rang with news that would change everything. "Mr. Mitchell, this is FBI agent Sarah Cooper. We need to discuss what we've discovered about Riverside Children's Home's financial records. Can you come in immediately? And bring your legal team. This is bigger than you know." The FBI field office in downtown Chicago felt like a fortress of justice, all concrete and steel and the weight of federal authority. David sat at a conference table surrounded by Agent Sarah Cooper, Assistant Director Michael Ross, and enough evidence boxes to fill a small warehouse. Emma and Tommy were safely with Dr. Williams, finally beginning therapy sessions that would help them process their trauma. "Mr. Mitchell," Agent Cooper began, spreading financial documents across the polished table. "Your private investigator uncovered the tip of an iceberg. What we've found in the past 48 hours is a systematic operation involving multiple children's homes across 3 states. David leaned forward, his business instincts immediately recognizing the scope of what she was describing. Money laundering? Worse. Riverside Children's Home has been deliberately sabotaging adoptions to maintain a steady population of long-term residents. The state pays more for children who've been in the system for over 2 years, nearly double the standard rate for difficult-to-place children. Assistant Director Ross pulled out a chart showing payment structures. They've been creating difficult-to-place children by psychologically damaging them. The revelation hit David like a physical blow. They've been torturing children for profit. It gets darker. We've identified at least 12 other facilities in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana operating similar schemes. Walsh wasn't acting alone. This is an organized criminal enterprise disguised as child welfare. Agent Cooper's voice carried the controlled fury of someone who'd spent 20 years fighting injustice. Your Emma and Tommy weren't just victims, they were profit centers. 2 children generating approximately $8,000 per month in state funding with minimal oversight. David had to grip the edge of the table to maintain his composure. The punishment room, designed to break children's spirits systematically. Kids who fight the system, who ask questions, who try to protect siblings. They get targeted for psychological destruction until they become compliant or age out. Ross showed him photographs of similar facilities. We've found punishment rooms in 8 of the 12 locations we're investigating. How many children are we talking about? Agent Cooper's expression grew even grimmer. Conservative estimate, over 300 children actively being abused right now. Some have been in this network of facilities for their entire lives, move between institutions whenever someone gets too curious. David thought about Emma's fierce protectiveness, Tommy's terror, the hollow-eyed children he'd seen in Riverside's common room. Multiply that by 300. What do you need from me? Your media attention has been invaluable. Public pressure is forcing politicians to act instead of hiding behind bureaucratic delays. But we need your resources for something bigger. Ross leaned forward intently. We're planning coordinated raids on all 12 facilities simultaneously. We need temporary housing, psychological support, medical care, and legal representation for potentially hundreds of traumatized children. You have it. Whatever you need, unlimited budget. David's response was immediate and absolute. There's more. Several of these facilities have connections to international adoption agencies that we suspect are involved in trafficking. This investigation could span multiple countries and take years to fully unravel. Agent Cooper studied David's face carefully. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? Because once we start this, there's no going back. David thought about Emma teaching younger children to read in secret, about Tommy's desperate clinging after 4 days in solitary confinement, about the hundreds of children still trapped in similar hells across multiple states. Agent Cooper, 6 months ago, I was ready to give up on life entirely. These children gave me a reason to fight again. You don't have to ask if I'm committed. You have to worry about keeping up with me. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Williams. Emergency session needed. Tommy had breakthrough. He's ready to tell us about the other children, the ones who didn't make it out. The room fell silent as David shared the message. Agent Cooper and Ross exchanged grim looks. "Mr. Mitchell," Ross said quietly, "I think you need to prepare yourself. If Tommy has information about children who didn't make it out, this investigation just became a potential murder case." As David raced back to his penthouse to comfort two traumatized children who were about to become key witnesses in a federal criminal case, he realized that saving Emma and Tommy was only the beginning. They were about to expose a network of evil that stretched far beyond anything he'd imagined. But for the first time since Sarah's death, David Mitchell felt truly alive, powered by righteous fury and unconditional love for two children who deserved justice and safety. The war was expanding, but so was his army of allies. And David had never lost a war that mattered this much. Dr. Williams's office felt different when David arrived that evening, heavier somehow, as if the weight of terrible secrets had settled into the furniture itself. Emma sat in a corner chair, coloring with aggressive strokes, while Tommy was curled in Dr. Williams's lap, his small voice barely audible as he spoke into a digital recorder. "Tommy's been incredibly brave today," Dr. Williams said quietly, her usually warm demeanor subdued. "But what he shared, David, I've been treating traumatized children for 15 years, and I've never heard anything like this." Tommy looked up with eyes that held knowledge no 5-year-old should possess. "Mr. David, I told Dr. Patricia about the kids who got taken away in the night, the ones who never came back." David's blood ran cold. "Taken away where, buddy?" "Mrs. Walsh said they went to special families, but—" Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw them put Lucy in a van with no windows. She was screaming for her mama, but her mama was dead, just like our mama and daddy are dead." Dr. Williams handed David a legal pad covered with notes. According to Tommy, children who caused too many problems or had no living relatives would disappear during night shifts. Staff told other children they'd been adopted, but Tommy noticed these children never got the normal adoption preparation. New clothes, goodbye parties, meetings with families. "How many children?" David's voice was steady, but inside he was fracturing. Tommy remembers at least 8 over the past year. All of them had no family contact, no advocates, no one to ask questions. Dr. Williams' professional composure cracked slightly. "David, I'm legally obligated to report suspected trafficking, and based on Tommy's testimony." Emma looked up from her violent coloring. "They took kids to the bad place. The place where people hurt kids for money and take pictures. I heard Mrs. Walsh talking on the phone about merchandise and special clients who pay extra for fresh inventory." The room went silent, except for the sound of David's heart hammering against his ribs. His 7-year-old daughter, because that's what Emma was now, his daughter, had just described a child trafficking operation operating under the cover of state-sanctioned child welfare. "Emma," he said carefully, "did you ever see any of these phone calls? Did you hear names or places?" Emma nodded gravely. "Mrs. Walsh has a red phone in her desk drawer. She only uses it at night when most of the staff goes home. She talks about product quality and shipping schedules and premium clients in other states." David's phone was in his hand and dialing Agent Cooper before he'd consciously decided to move. "Agent Cooper, it's David Mitchell. I need the FBI at Dr. Williams' office immediately. We have testimony about child trafficking, and I think Riverside Children's Home is a front for selling children." When Agent Cooper arrived 30 minutes later with a specialized team of child interview experts, the scope of the investigation exploded exponentially. Tommy's testimony, given with Emma holding his hand for support, painted a picture of systematic child trafficking disguised as adoption services. "The night people came for different kids," Tommy explained to the gentle FBI specialist. "They didn't use the front door. They came through the basement where the punishment room is. Mrs. Walsh would bring kids down there and tell them they were going to meet their new family, but the people weren't nice like families. They were scary, and they had cameras. Agent Cooper's jaw tightened with professional fury. "Tommy, you're being incredibly brave. Can you remember anything about the people who came at night? What they looked like or what they said?" One man had a snake tattoo on his neck. He told Mrs. Walsh that Lucy was perfect merchandise because she was small and had been broken in properly. Tommy's clinical repetition of such horrific language from a 5-year-old's mouth made everyone in the room flinch. Mrs. Walsh gave him money and he gave her money, and then they took Lucy away in the van. Dr. Williams had to step outside to compose herself. David gathered both children into his arms, his voice fierce with protective love. "Emma, Tommy, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are never, ever going back to that place. You're safe now, and you're my children forever. Do you understand?" Emma pressed her face against his chest. "Are you going to stop them from hurting other kids like they hurt us?" "Yes," David said with absolute certainty. "We're going to stop them. We're going to save every child we can find, and we're going to make sure the bad people never hurt anyone again." As Agent Cooper coordinated an emergency federal response that would involve multiple law enforcement agencies across 6 states, David realized that his war against Riverside Children's Home had just become something much larger and more important. A battle against a network of monsters who bought and sold children for profit. But he also realized something else. Emma and Tommy hadn't just survived this evil. They'd gathered intelligence that could destroy it completely. His brave, brilliant children were about to help save hundreds of other kids. The final confrontation with Director Walsh was going to be more devastating than she could possibly imagine. The coordinated federal raids began at exactly 4:47 a.m. across 6 states, with FBI teams simultaneously hitting 12 facilities connected to the trafficking network. David watched from the command center that had been established in his penthouse. Multiple screens showing live feeds from raid locations, while Emma and Tommy slept peacefully in the guest bedroom, finally safe under 24-hour federal protection. "Riverside is secure," Agent Cooper's voice crackled through the communication system. "Walsh is in custody, and we've found the red phone Emma described, along with financial records that make the Pentagon's budget look simple." On the main screen, David watched as Director Walsh was led away in handcuffs, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. Children were being evacuated from the building, each one receiving immediate medical attention and psychological evaluation. Some were so traumatized they could barely speak. Others, like Emma had been, showed fierce protectiveness toward younger victims. "Mr. Mitchell," Assistant Director Ross called from across the room, "we need to discuss the immediate crisis. We have 237 children who need emergency placement, medical care, and trauma counseling. The state system is completely overwhelmed." David didn't hesitate. "I'm establishing the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Child Protection, effective immediately. We'll handle housing, medical care, psychological support, and legal advocacy for every child we rescued. Budget is unlimited." Atunu, his assistant, Maria Santos, looked up from her laptop where she'd been coordinating with contractors and child welfare experts across the country. "David, I've got 3 hotels willing to provide secure, family-friendly accommodations. St. Mary's Hospital is setting up a specialized trauma unit, and Dr. Williams has assembled a team of 40 child psychologists who can be here by tomorrow morning." Rebecca Torres, who had been granted exclusive access to document the raids, approached David with her camera crew. "David, the footage we're getting from these facilities, it's going to change child welfare law forever. But I need to ask, how are Emma and Tommy handling being at the center of something this massive?" David glanced toward the bedroom where his children slept. They're remarkably resilient, but they're still processing their own trauma. Emma keeps asking if she can help comfort the other rescued children because she knows how scary it is to be alone. Tommy draws pictures of all the kids he remembers from Riverside and asks if they're safe now. And how are you handling becoming a father in the middle of a federal investigation? For the first time in hours, David smiled genuinely. 6 months ago I thought my life was over. Now I have 2 incredible children who've taught me that love and family aren't about biology. They're about choosing to protect each other no matter what. Emma and Tommy chose me as much as I chose them. Doctor. Williams emerged from a conference call with Federal Victim Services coordinators. David, we're seeing patterns across all the rescued children that confirm Tommy's testimony. Systematic psychological conditioning, deliberate trauma to make children compliant, and evidence of preparation for trafficking to customers in multiple countries. Agent Cooper's voice came through the comms again. We've got positive IDs on 12 of the missing children Tommy remembered. They're alive, they're safe, and they're being reunited with surviving relatives where possible. Lucy, the girl Tommy specifically mentioned, she's in protective custody and asking for the boy who remembered her name. David felt tears. He didn't know he was holding back. Can we arrange for Tommy to talk to her? I think they both need to know they survived. Already coordinating it, but David, there's something else. We found Walsh's client list. Cooper's voice turned grim. This network was supplying children to buyers in 17 countries. We're talking about potential rescue operations from Asia to Europe to South America. The scope was staggering, but David felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Absolute clarity of purpose. Agent Cooper, you have unlimited resources from Mitchell Technologies and the Sarah Mitchell Foundation. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're going to find every child and bring them home. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. Mr. David, I heard voices. Are the other kids okay? David scooped her into his arms. Yes, sweetheart. Because you and Tommy were so brave, we found lots of children who needed help, just like you did. Can we help them learn to feel safe again, like Dr. Patricia helped us? That's exactly what we're going to do, David promised, holding his daughter close while coordinating a global rescue operation. We're going to help every single one of them find their way home. As dawn broke over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of hope and new beginnings, David realized that tomorrow would bring the final confrontation with Director Walsh, the woman who had built an empire of suffering that Emma and Tommy's courage had finally torn down. But tonight, he was simply a father holding his child while they worked together to save others, and that felt like the most important job he'd ever had. 6 months later, David stood in Judge Patricia Hamilton's chambers, watching Emma fidget with the collar of her new dress, while Tommy practiced writing his new name, Tommy Mitchell, in careful 5-year-old handwriting. The adoption hearing was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes, making official what had been true in their hearts since that rainy day, when a desperate little girl had asked a stranger to pretend to hug her. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Hamilton said warmly, reviewing the extensive file before her. In 30 years on the bench, I've never seen an adoption case quite like this. Emma and Tommy, do you understand what's happening today? Emma straightened with the poise she'd developed over months of therapy and healing. Yes, Your Honor. Today, you're going to make it official that Mr. David is our daddy forever, and we're going to be the Mitchell family for real. Tommy looked up from his careful writing. And nobody can ever separate us again, right? Not even if I have nightmares or Emma asks too many questions. Judge Hamilton's eyes softened. That's exactly right, Tommy. Today, you become a forever family and no one can change that. The courtroom was packed with an unusual collection of witnesses. Agent Cooper and the FBI team who had become family friends, Dr. Williams, who had guided all three of them through months of healing, Rebecca Torres, whose Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage had sparked nationwide child welfare reform, and dozens of children and families who had been rescued because of Emma and Tommy's courage. But David's eyes were drawn to the back row, where director Margaret Walsh sat in shackles between two federal marshals. She was facing life in prison for her role in the trafficking network. But David had requested her presence for reasons that went beyond legal proceedings. "Margaret Walsh," Judge Hamilton addressed the defendant directly, "you have requested to make a statement before this adoption is finalized. The court will hear you, but I warn you that any attempt to disrupt these proceedings will result in immediate removal." Walsh stood slowly, her face gaunt from months in federal custody. When she spoke, her voice carried none of its former authority. I need these children to know something." She looked directly at Emma and Tommy, her eyes filling with tears. "I convinced myself that I was preparing you for the real world, that making you strong meant breaking you first. But watching the investigation, seeing what you've accomplished, seeing the hundreds of children you've saved..." Her voice broke completely. "You were never broken. You were the strongest children I ever met, and I was too damaged by my own childhood to recognize strength when I saw it." Emma stood up from her chair, walked across the courtroom, and stopped directly in front of Walsh. The entire room held its breath as this 7-year-old girl faced the woman who had tormented her for 2 years. "Mrs. Walsh," Emma said quietly, "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying hate makes you smaller, and I'm going to be too busy being happy to be small anymore." The silence that followed was profound and healing. Walsh collapsed back into her chair, sobbing with what sounded like genuine remorse for the first time in her adult life. Judge Hamilton wiped her own eyes before continuing. "Emma Chen and Tommy Chen, by the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I hereby declare you to be legally adopted by David Mitchell. Your names are now Emma Mitchell and Tommy Mitchell, and you are forever members of the Mitchell family." The courtroom erupted in applause and tears. David knelt down as both children launched themselves into his arms, holding them as if he could absorb all their pain and replace it with pure love. "We're really a family now," Tommy whispered in wonder. "We were always a family," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "The papers just make it official." Later that evening, as they celebrated at their new home, a sprawling house in Lincoln Park with a yard for playing and rooms for all the rescued children who visited regularly, Emma found David standing in his study, looking at a photograph on his desk. "Is that Mommy Sarah?" Emma asked quietly. David nodded, lifting her onto his lap. "Yes, sweetheart. I think she would have loved you and Tommy very much. Do you think she's sad that we're your children now instead of her babies?" David considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Emma, I think Mommy Sarah sent you to me that day when you needed help. I think she knew I needed to learn how to love again, and she knew you and Tommy needed someone to fight for you. I think she's watching over all three of us and smiling." Emma studied Sarah's photograph thoughtfully. "She looks kind, like the kind of mommy who would want her husband to save kids who needed saving." That's exactly the kind of person she was. Tommy appeared in the doorway, dragging his favorite blanket. "Daddy David, will you read us the story about the family that saves each other?" It had become their nightly ritual. A story David had written about a businessman who thought he had nothing left to live for until 2 brave children showed him that love multiplies when you give it away. As they settled into the reading nook David had built in their family room, surrounded by the soft glow of lamps and the security of home, David reflected on how much had changed since that rainy October day. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation had rescued over 800 children globally, reformed child welfare laws in 12 states, and provided healing services to thousands of families. Emma had started a support group for rescued children, teaching them the courage she'd learned from protecting Tommy. Tommy had begun speaking at conferences, his innocent wisdom helping adults understand the perspective of vulnerable children. But the greatest transformation was David himself. The hollow, grieving man who had wandered Chicago streets looking for a reason to keep living had become a father, an advocate, and a warrior for justice, all because a 7-year-old girl had asked him to pretend to hug her. "Daddy," Emma said as he finished the story, "do you think other kids out there need families like we needed you?" I'm sure they do, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" Emma and Tommy exchanged a look that David had learned meant they'd been plotting something wonderful and probably expensive. "Well," Emma said carefully, "Tommy and I were thinking that this house is pretty big, and we know lots of kids who need homes, and we're pretty good at being big siblings now." David looked at his remarkable children, survivors who had become healers, victims who had become heroes, broken kids who had taught him how to be whole again. "Are you suggesting we expand the Mitchell family?" "Only if you want to," Tommy said quickly. "We know we're probably enough work already." David pulled both children close, overwhelmed by their capacity for love after everything they'd endured. "Emma Mitchell and Tommy Mitchell, you are never too much work. You're the greatest gifts I've ever received, and if you want to share our family with other children who need love, then that's exactly what we'll do." As thunder rumbled outside their warm, safe home, David remembered another stormy night when a desperate embrace had changed 3 lives forever. Now surrounded by his children's laughter and planning to open their hearts to even more kids who needed families, he understood that love wasn't something you ran out of when you gave it away. Love was something that grew stronger every time you chose to share it, and the Mitchell family was just getting started.